Title: Silent Rupture. At exactly 10:18 a.m. on January 6, 2026, the impossible happened. A magnitude 6.2 earthquake tore through western Japan, a region that wasn't supposed to break. This wasn't the eastern coast where seismic monsters lurk. This was the quiet zone. But in 19 terrifying minutes, that quiet shattered into 21 aftershocks, triggering a cascade of events that reveals a disturbing truth about Japan's hidden vulnerabilities. Stay with me, because what happened next exposes why this earthquake changes everything we thought we knew about where disaster strikes. The ground beneath Shimane Prefecture didn't just shake, it convulsed with a violence that defied every geological prediction. At a bone-crushing depth of just 6.2 miles, 10 kilometers below the surface, tectonic forces that had been building for decades finally snapped. The shallow rupture amplified every tremor, turning what should have been a manageable earthquake into a region-wide catastrophe that registered upper 5 on Japan's Shindo intensity scale. But here's what makes this event truly terrifying. Western Japan isn't supposed to produce magnitude 6.2 earthquakes. This is the geological equivalent of a tornado striking Antarctica. Professor Yoshihiro Matsumoto from Kyoto University captured the shock perfectly. Western Japan's fault lines are less active, but stress builds over time. This quake shows we must remain vigilant even in quiet areas. The numbers tell a story of unprecedented regional impact. 21.1 million people felt the earth move beneath their feet. Heavy furniture toppled across Matsu City. Drivers lost control of their vehicles as the ground rolled like ocean waves. Power lines swayed so violently that surveillance cameras captured the mesmerizing dance of destruction across the entire prefecture. Then came the aftershocks. Not the gentle trembles that usually follow earthquakes, but 21 separate ruptures within 24 hours. The most devastating struck just 19 minutes after the initial quake, a magnitude 5.1 monster that shattered any hope this was an isolated event. Each aftershock reminded the 1 in 200 people huddled in emergency shelters that their nightmare was far from over. What transforms a routine seismic event into a region-threatening disaster? The answer lies in physics so brutal, it defies comprehension. When tectonic plates rupture at 6.2 miles, 10 kilometers below the surface, every joule of energy travels with minimal absorption through solid rock. The shallow depth means maximum intensity. Imagine the difference between a bomb exploding in your basement versus one detonating a mile underground. The JMA recorded something unprecedented: Level 4 long-period ground motion in western Tottori Prefecture. This represents the strongest possible designation on their scale, and it was the first time this level had been observed in the prefecture since the devastating January 2024 Noto Peninsula earthquake that killed 698 people. Long-period ground motion doesn't just shake buildings, it makes them sway like trees in a hurricane, amplifying structural stress exponentially. But why did Western Japan rupture at all? The region sits atop a complex network of fault lines that seismologists barely understand. Unlike the thoroughly mapped eastern coast where the Pacific Plate grinds predictably against the North American Plate, Western Japan's geological foundation consists of interconnected fractures that can remain dormant for decades before suddenly releasing accumulated stress in catastrophic bursts. Dr. Aiko Tanaka, a leading seismologist, explained the terrifying mechanics. The shallow depth made this quake particularly intense for those near the epicenter. When seismic waves travel such a short distance through solid rock, they maintain their destructive power, creating ground acceleration forces that can exceed 1 dai, the same force astronauts experience during rocket launches. The earthquake's timing amplified the terror. At 10:18 a.m., millions of people were going about their morning routines when Japan's earthquake early warning system screamed alerts across television broadcasts and mobile phones. But Professor Kazuya Nakayachi from Doshisha University reveals a chilling reality. People stay still looking at their cell phone screens, receiving the alert. Those precious seconds of warning meant nothing when human psychology froze in the face of unprecedented disaster. Stay with me, because understanding this mechanism reveals why what happened next threatens Japan's entire energy infrastructure. 6 people lay in hospital beds across western Japan, their bodies bearing witness to the earthquake's human toll. 4 victims struggled with injuries in Matsui City, Shimane Prefecture, while 2 more fought for recovery in Fukuyama City, Hiroshima Prefecture. These weren't statistics. They were mothers, fathers, workers who had started their Tuesday morning with no expectation that the earth beneath their feet would betray them. The injuries tell a story of sudden violence. Falls as the ground lurched unpredictably, crushing impacts from toppling furniture and falling objects. One local resident near the epicenter captured the terror. "I've lived here all my life and never experienced a quake this strong. It's unsettling." For people in Western Japan's quiet zone, this earthquake shattered a fundamental assumption about safety. But the physical injuries represent only the visible damage. 1,200 people spent the night in emergency shelters, their homes either damaged or deemed unsafe due to aftershock risks. Families huddled together on evacuation center floors, listening to every creak and groan of the building above them, wondering if the next tremor would bring the ceiling down. A local business owner revealed the cascading human impact. "The train suspension is hurting my deliveries. I hope services resume soon." The Sanyo Shinkansen bullet train, Japan's economic lifeline, ground to a complete halt between major stations. Thousands of passengers found themselves stranded, their schedules destroyed, their connections severed. Business deals collapsed, family reunions were canceled. The economic heartbeat of Western Japan stuttered to a stop. Another resident near the epicenter voiced what millions were thinking. "The shaking was so intense I thought it was another 2011. Thank God it wasn't." The ghost of the great Tohoku earthquake haunted every tremor, every aftershock triggering memories of the tsunami that killed nearly 16,000 people. This earthquake awakened Japan's deepest collective trauma. Ayataka Ibita from the Japan Meteorological Agency delivered words that froze the nation. "Seismic activity is still active in the area. There is a possibility that a quake larger than a strong 5 will occur, so please remain vigilant." Not might occur, not could occur, will occur. The certainty in his voice reflected seismic data showing fault lines still grinding, still building pressure, still preparing to rupture again. The timeline is terrifying. According to the JMA's analysis, earthquakes measuring strong 5 or higher on the Shindo scale could strike over the following week, with the highest risk concentrated in the first 2 to 3 days. Each passing hour brought the region closer to another potential disaster, each aftershock a reminder that the earth beneath Western Japan had fundamentally changed. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's emergency statement revealed the government's deep concern. The government is assessing the extent of the damage and asked local residents to make necessary preparations for potential aftershocks of the same level. When a nation's leader uses language like potential aftershocks of the same level, they're preparing citizens for repeated catastrophe. Professor Matsumoto's analysis exposed the true scope of the threat. The complex fault line system underlying Western Japan remains poorly understood compared to the eastern regions. Stress accumulation patterns that took decades to build could trigger additional ruptures across multiple interconnected fractures. This wasn't just one earthquake. It was potentially the first domino in a seismic cascade. The 21 aftershocks within 24 hours reveal a terrifying pattern of escalating geological instability. Each tremor represents another fracture, another release of tectonic stress, another crack in the foundation of Western Japan's seismic stability. The magnitude 5.1 aftershock that struck just 19 minutes after the initial rupture proved this wasn't a simple stress release. It was the beginning of a sustained seismic crisis. Maritime Self-Defense Force officials conducted comprehensive damage assessment flights, their aerial surveys revealing the true scope of impact across the Chugoku region. Road cracks spiderwebbed through Sakai Minato City in Tottori Prefecture. Multiple landslides blocked rural transportation routes. The visible damage extended far beyond the immediate epicenter, indicating deep structural changes in the regional geology. But the most alarming escalation pattern involves the proximity to critical infrastructure. The Shimane nuclear power plant sits just 30 miles from the epicenter, close enough that seismic waves reach the facility within seconds. While immediate inspections revealed no abnormalities, each aftershock brings another test of the plant's earthquake-resistant systems. The transportation disruption created cascading regional impacts. With bullet train services suspended, alternative transportation routes became overwhelmed. Economic activity ground to a halt as supply chains ruptured. The interconnected nature of modern infrastructure meant that a single seismic event in western Japan's quiet zone triggered disruptions across multiple prefectures. Stay with me, because the historical context reveals why this pattern of escalation could trigger something far worse than anything we've seen before. The 2000 Tottori earthquake provides a chilling preview of what Western Japan faces. That magnitude 6.77.3 monster damaged over 109,000 homes and injured more than 182 people across the same region, now experiencing renewed seismic activity. The geological conditions that produced the 2000 disaster remain virtually unchanged, meaning the potential for similar or greater destruction lurks beneath every aftershock. But the 2024 Noto Peninsula earthquake offers an even more terrifying comparison. On January 1, 2024, a magnitude 7.6 earthquake struck Japan's western regions, killing 698 people and creating widespread destruction. The level 4 long-period ground motion recorded during this latest event matches the strongest measurements from that deadly disaster, suggesting comparable destructive potential. The pattern is unmistakable. Western Japan's supposedly quiet seismic zones can produce catastrophic earthquakes with minimal warning, devastating consequences, and prolonged aftershock sequences that keep entire regions in a state of terror for weeks or months. Right now, as seismic monitoring stations across Western Japan detect continued fault line activity, the region exists in a state of elevated threat that could persist for weeks. The JMA's warning about earthquakes measuring strong 5 or higher represents not speculation, but scientific certainty based on ongoing tectonic stress measurements. Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara's assurance that nuclear power plants in the region hadn't been affected by the quake as of 11 a.m. provides temporary relief, but each aftershock brings another test of critical infrastructure systems. The Nuclear Regulation Authority maintains continuous monitoring, understanding that repeated seismic stress could compromise safety systems over time. Have you considered what happens when a region unprepared for major seismic activity faces sustained earthquake sequences? Western Japan's building codes, emergency response systems, and public preparedness protocols were designed for moderate seismic activity. The current threat level challenges every assumption about regional disaster preparedness. The Sanyo Shinkansen suspension demonstrates infrastructure vulnerability across the region. When high-speed rail systems, Japan's most earthquake-resistant transportation, shut down due to seismic concerns, it reveals the severity of ongoing geological instability. Transportation officials expect partial service resumption by evening, but only pending final safety checks that could reveal additional structural concerns. The seismic data reveals 3 increasingly disturbing scenarios. First, the aftershock sequence could gradually diminish over the coming weeks, allowing the region to return to normal while remaining forever changed by the knowledge that Western Japan's quiet zone can produce devastating earthquakes with minimal warning. But the second scenario is more troubling. Continued stress accumulation along interconnected fault lines could trigger additional major earthquakes, potentially exceeding the initial magnitude 6.2 event. The complex geological structure underlying Western Japan means that one rupture can destabilize multiple fault segments, creating a cascading failure across the entire regional tectonic system. The third scenario represents a seismologist's nightmare, a major earthquake striking during ongoing aftershock activity. When buildings already weakened by repeated tremors face catastrophic structural failure, the combination of accumulated damage and renewed seismic stress could transform what might otherwise be survivable earthquakes into region-threatening disasters. Current monitoring shows continued seismic activity across multiple fault segments, Each measurement reveals tectonic plates still grinding against each other, still building pressure, still preparing for additional ruptures. The shallow depth that made the initial earthquake so destructive remains unchanged, meaning any future events will carry the same amplified intensity. Therefore, Western Japan faces an unprecedented geological crisis that challenges everything. Seismologists thought they understood about regional seismic patterns. The earthquake that struck Shimane Prefecture wasn't just an isolated event. It was a wake-up call, revealing hidden vulnerabilities across an entire region considered geologically stable. The 21 aftershocks within 24 hours demonstrate that tectonic forces beneath Western Japan remain active, unstable, and unpredictable. Each tremor represents another fracture in the region's geological foundation, another crack in the assumption that some areas of Japan are immune to major seismic disasters. But the most disturbing aspect of this crisis involves what seismologists don't know. The complex fault line system underlying Western Japan remains poorly mapped and inadequately understood compared to the thoroughly studied eastern coast. This knowledge gap means that current threat assessments may dramatically underestimate the region's true seismic potential. A local fire department chief summarized the ongoing uncertainty. "We responded immediately to injury reports, but thankfully most were minor incidents related to falls and falling objects." The word "thankfully" reveals how close Western Japan came to a much worse disaster, and how unprepared the region remains for what geological forces might unleash next. The Shimane nuclear power plant continues operating under enhanced monitoring, but each aftershock tests safety systems designed for regional seismic patterns that no longer apply. The fundamental assumptions about Western Japan's geological stability have been shattered, but the infrastructure built on those assumptions remains vulnerable. The earth beneath Western Japan is still moving, still fracturing, still building toward something seismologists cannot predict or prevent. This earthquake revealed that nowhere in Japan is truly safe, but what it didn't reveal is when the next rupture will strike, where it will hit, or how much stronger it might be.